Okay, so it's the Easter weekend, and I just want to say happy Easter to all of you guys. And I just want to share something on prosperity. Basically, I was scrolling through TikTok and I saw a couple of videos, especially the Bryce Crawford and Kenneth Copeland video, but then I also saw some other TikToks and they were talking about the prosperity gospel, and I also just want to share something on it as well. So, first of all, the term prosperity gospel, I don't think it's not really a good term because, first of all, the gospel, um, you know, we only have the four gospel books: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and it's all about Jesus Christ. Gospel means good news, and the good news is Jesus Christ, God's gift of salvation. And prosperity is really not something that Jesus was emphasizing in his messages, when he went about preaching and teaching during his ministry. And we can also see from his own livelihood, his own life, uh, he wasn't really displaying, a lavish lifestyle, he wasn't really prosperous by any means of materialistic measurement. As far as we can tell, he was a simple man living a simple life, going about cities and towns and villages preaching the gospel of God. And before that, he was a carpenter. So, um, this is what I want to share about prosperity. It's not bad. Prosperity is not a bad thing in itself. But the thing is, today we know that many people, um, when they become religious, or when they start attending church, quite a few of them tend to be joining these new denominations um, that are set up to attract people by means of materialistic um, attraction, materialistic wealth, promises of prosperity. But I want to say here that this is not really what God intended for us. Prosperity is not the end goal of a life spent following in the footsteps of Jesus. I know, um, there are cases in the Bible, there are many stories in the Bible of people becoming prosperous. Especially, we can see this with the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and also the sons of Jacob. But let's carefully look at their stories. So, first of all, Abraham, yes, he was a merchant and he was very prosperous, but according to how he would have been viewed by other merchants of that time, according to the standard of that time, he was a bit of a um, laughing stock, because even though he was very prosperous in terms of materialistic wealth, he wasn't prosperous where to the people of that time, it mattered the most, and that was in having children. He had no child for the longest time, for most of his life. Um, And back in the ancient world, back then, when you don't have a child, especially for someone who's a merchant, like he's rich, he could have just had a child through um, taking on another wife, because we know Sarah wasn't able to produce a child. Um, so he could have just taken another wife or wives and had many children through those wives. Remember, polygamy was something that was very much practiced back then. And obviously, we know from the story that he kind of went through that. He had a child with Hagar, but that was really not the plan and the purpose that God had for him. And it was God's will for him to not have a child until he was 100 years old. And Abraham was somebody who was really a friend of God. The Bible describes him as that. He was a follower of God, and he knew that God from the very beginning intended it to be that a man is to have only one wife, and he stuck with that, even though it meant he didn't enjoy the blessing of having many children, um, and had no child until he was 100 years old. And back, like I said, back then, children, having lots of children, was seen as real signs of prosperity, because then you have somebody to pass on your wealth to. Otherwise, it's like you just stock it all up and then it's gone from you when you die. And then we can also look at Isaac. Yes, Isaac, definitely. The Bible records him as being very prosperous. But then we might say that the cost of all that prosperity was him and Rebecca, the two of them having two villainous sons. Yeah, I'm calling Jacob and Esau villains because they were more villains than heroes, really. Neither of them were really exemplary men of God. I guess it's a case of, being rich and having uh, spoiled brats as parents. Esau, we all know that he rejected God, rejected his birthright. Jacob, we know that he was a cheater and a liar, cheated his brother Esau, took his blessings from him, lied to his father, and that's how he got it. So, yes, it's only by the grace of God that God chose Jacob to be somebody whom he can carry out his plan and his purpose with here on earth. But it was really like choosing the lesser of two evils. So yes, Jacob, he was chosen by God, but really, God had to discipline him, refine him, and that was through the means of his uncle Jacob, who, Laban was also a cheater, and that was how Jacob learned his lesson. Then also there's Joseph. Joseph's story really lays out this principle. I don't know if it's a principle, but I'm calling it a principle. Uh, you can we can say it like a metaphor, but for Joseph it was literal, and it is this: no prison, no palace. So basically, if you don't go through hardship, you don't end up with wealth. But for Joseph, really, it's not just hardship, like it was really grueling, trying times, testing him um, through real pain, and he had to endure all that, and that's how he came to this place of having great prosperity, being in the palace and being in charge of all Egypt. So yes, only through such a process are we allowed to get to such a place as the palace. So that's what we see happening in Joseph's life. So yeah, prosperity, like that's what I want to share here now. Like you have to go through this process to be able to pay your dues first, like the prison period, or the intense poverty endurance. You go through that process first, and then that's how you arrive at prosperity. But even then, you know it's okay if most of us are not prosperous, because that's not what God wills for us in our lives. For the rest of us, um, as Paul said in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 to 8, but godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. So yes, if we have food, if we have clothes, if we have a roof over our head, if we have good health, then we can be content and realize that we have everything we need. And through the means of godliness, then we can see we have everything we want.